All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Brianna Yoakum. I'm the Director of Accreditation here at the Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences. And today we are hosting a webinar on trauma and substance use disorder. And we have our two presenters here, Cameron Fordmeyer and Shane Gulley. And they will be leading this discussion today. We're recording this, so it will be a resource for you. We'll send it out via email after the presentation, probably within the week, as well as with any resources that they have for us today. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to our presenters.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So we have a lot to cover, and trauma has a lot to do with it. So we're going to try to keep our introductions brief and then get into ground rules and get right into it. So my name is Cameron Fordmeyer. I am the owner and operator of Awareness Consulting and Training. I'm also the regional administrator for AOT and RNP with Greater Columbia Behavioral Health and a adjunct instructor at Columbia Basin College. Have had over 24 years now of behavioral health experience working in a variety of settings in direct care. I've done community protection group homes, psychiatric inpatient units, case management, therapy, been a designated crisis responder still since 2010, and the last 10 of those have been in some form of leadership. And so I've supervised crisis triage facilities, managed crisis services for Benton and Franklin County, jail mental health for Benton County, the prosecutorial diversion program for Benton and Franklin, and then the mobile outreach team that paired up designated crisis responders with law enforcement. Currently, also overseeing AOT and RNP for this region. So I will kick that over for Shane, who is my go-to expert for trauma and anything neurodivergent.
So good morning. My name is Shane Gulley. A little bit about my background. So I've been everything from an EMT advanced to a corrections deputy to a designated crisis responder. So if it's been first responder, I've been it in some capacity or another. I've trained mountain rescue, search and rescue, wilderness survival, and wilderness medicine, as well as currently hold both national and international certifications in first responder treatment, in neurodivergent treatment, and in trauma. And I have a master's in marriage and family counseling and a master's in trauma. So that's me in a nutshell.
So we'll get right into ground rules. So today we are covering trauma. So this can be a little triggering, especially if we get into specific stuff. So we are going to do our best to speak with respect, compassion, and empathy about this population, especially those in recovery. And we are going to use people first language. So we are not going to refer to people as druggies or schizophrenics, or we're going to use them, people living with A, B, and C, right? So again, personal stories are always encouraged, especially if you have specific questions. But they're not required. So you don't have to participate. You don't have to say anything. But if you do, there is confidentiality that we have to discuss. So because this is recorded and because this is for everybody, if you're using specific examples that may include some demographics or identifying information, please try to limit those. If you can't for whatever reason, or the question that you have maybe is embarrassing or something not for the group that you don't want to put in the group chat, you can always send that to me directly and I will omit anything that is identifying. And so we'll answer that question via that way. So if you do, just send it to me directly. If not, you can always put it in the chat, and I have the chat up and monitoring so I can see the slides. I can see everybody on Zoom, and I can see the chat in real time. So I'll wait for a break in there and get that in. And then limitations of training wise, of course, this is for you to apply to anybody and the residents that you're serving, but it doesn't give you CEUs, it doesn't give you a degree, it doesn't have the ability to diagnose or do anything like that. So we still want to make that known. And then the parking lot is for if there's a question or a comment that requires additional explanation, or it'll be covered later on in the slides, we will note that and then come back to it at the Q&A session. So without further ado, we'll get right into this.
So some of the things that we're going to be looking at is the definition of trauma. Now, I have complex definitions and I have simple. I like simple, and that's typically what we're going to try and go to most of all throughout this entire training. Is I'm going to kind of make a simple definition because it's a lot easier to remember and it's a lot easier to apply. So we're going to go through definition of trauma and then the effects The difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic stress injury, and this is a big one because this is a difference in language that applies to neurolinguistics that actually gives us a better understanding of what's really going on with the brain. And then ways we can respond, immediate trauma treatment, the long-term treatment plan, and then different forms of trauma, as well as how we can build a support system. Okay, so trauma. So there's three different versions that we typically understand. There's the primary trauma, which is what we directly experience or witness. Our secondary trauma is comes from dialogue. It comes from the stories that others tell, and we actually experience that trauma with them. And then vicarious trauma is actually experiencing that to the point where we feel like we're living through somebody else's trauma.
So for us as
Um,
caregivers, right, for you in any recovery residence, this is where we have to be mindful ourselves, where the resident may experience the primary trauma, but we can also be affected by secondary and vicarious as well. So this, when we talk about these things, it's good to know from that perspective, but this may also affect us. And so this is one of those where we're looking at it from both lenses of our client and also our self-preservation.
so I like to simplify things. Simple, it just makes my brain hurt less. So trauma, put simply, is just a negative emotion attaching itself to a memory. Anybody in here have anybody else in their life who's ever experienced the exact same thing they have? Do they have the same parents? Do they have the same thought process as anybody else in the world? The answer to that is no. We are all unique and we all have our own unique experiences. And so when we're dealing with trauma, that negative emotional attachment to that memory is very specific to an individual. So the only person you can ever compare yourself to is yourself. And the primary question I always ask is, am I better today than I was yesterday? Is this trauma resolving? Is the emotion dissipating? Or is it not? And it's kind of one of those things that we really need to look at when we start focusing in on trauma. So the disorder is something that interrupts our day-to-day life. Okay. Disorder is distinguished between disability, which is an inability to act or to respond to a situation, or inability to function in some way. That's a disability. Post-traumatic stress disorder refers to the idea that trauma has caused such a tremendous effect that it interrupts our day-to-day life. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a bunch of these negative emotionally attached memories collecting together and compounding and just building upon one another until it looks like a post-traumatic stress disorder, something interrupting our day-to-day life. Something to keep in mind with this, if Cameron, you want to flip back real quick? Cool. Something to keep in mind with this is that post-traumatic stress disorder is actually more like post-traumatic stress injury. I included the I there. Now, if you want to skip ahead. So post-traumatic stress injury is what we're trying to get to now. It's a way of expressing how trauma is actually damaging the brain. So I'm going to get a little heady and all scientific because I am a giant nerd and I love this stuff. So there are two little regions in our brain. There are two little organs. They're called the amygdala and the hippocampus, and they're right in the midbrain. And they love to control our emotional stuff. The amygdala controls a lot of our emotional response. The hippocampus, we used to think was the emotional memory center. We actually know a little bit more about it now. It's actually more like dispatch for law enforcement or fire. It takes the emotional memories and then blasts them out to the brain, to the cerebral cortex, to actually place the memory somewhere in our brain. This makes it fun because when we have trauma, we have inflammation that follows. these two little areas in our brain actually engorge, they swell because of the trauma. And they are next to other things that have a lot of functions. Hypothalamus, for instance, sits right above both of them and actually converts emotion into a physical response. This is a problem if it's getting infringed upon. Hence why that inflammation actually starts having some external effects. Now, with the hippocampus blasting it out into our cerebral cortex, which is kind of the outside of our brain, it actually is causing inflammation out there too. And actually, it will go as far as we can actually have trauma-induced autism and trauma-induced ADHD as a result, because the inflammation in the brain starts looking really similar to a neurodivergence. So here's a brain. I love pictures. So in the center, you can see the thalamus, or a little bit closer, the big red spot is actually the more the thalamus. It almost didn't extend right over far enough. But then right below that is the hypothalamus, and right below that is the amygdala. Well, the little node to the left that is yellow, that's actually pituitary gland. It actually helps us with our cellular production. So when we need to heal, the pituitary gland kicks up new cell growth so that we can actually heal faster. But if that amygdala is swollen up, it can actually put pressure on it. It makes it healing really difficult. It actually slows a whole healing process. The hippocampus is sitting right back at the back there. If it swells up, it starts putting pressure right on that big mass at the back. That's actually called our little brain or cerebellum. Now, the cerebellum is kind of fun. It controls balance, motor skills, all these fun things. You ever been walking down the hall and kind of just blisted into the wall? That's actually called postural sway. And it's actually a condition in which that cerebral cortex has actually been infringed upon. Now, it can be infringed upon by just basic inflammation. This is what we see typically with neurodivergence, or with trauma. It actually gets infringed upon because that hippocampus has enlarged so much that it's actually putting pressure on that. A lot of individuals who experience trauma can actually have blurred vision. That's the back of the brain, the occipital lobe, controls our eyes. It's actually that pressure pushing into the back of the brain, causing blurred vision, dizziness, all sorts of things. This is why we're starting to move towards post-traumatic stress injury. It's a physical change, it's a physical injury against our brain. So we have to kind of figure out a way to resolve that, right? So there's a lot of different regional controls in the brain and a lot of different hormones. I like to use humor, laughter. Laughter releases endorphins. When we have inflammation in our brain, hormones kind of go askew. Our brain starts releasing them a little more randomly. Cortisol being a big one. Cortisol is called the stress hormone. Cortisol is great in little amounts. In fact, we have to have it. If we don't have cortisol at all, we cease to function. We have to have some pushback. So cortisol acts as kind of that pushback that drives us until it doesn't. And when cortisol becomes too much, we actually start getting depressed. We start getting anxious. We start losing our function. When we have trauma, it causes these hormones to kind of go haywire. And that trauma is now interrupting the function of our brain. Changes everything from memory. We lose short-term memory. That's a big one. We'll have mood swings really drastically. We will have what we used to call dysthymia. It's now just called prolonged depression. But it's a state in which we can't actually even find joy. I love humor because humor releases endorphins, and endorphins block cortisol. It's amazing. We'll get into a few other things that do that as well, but it's why I like humor. I typically have a dark humor. It lets me about being a first responder sometime. I will tell you stories from the dark room, but this is because this is how we cope. This humor actually isn't a bad thing as long as we keep it in check and we use it to balance. So, a little bit more of an outline of why we move towards post-traumatic stress injury as opposed to post-traumatic stress disorder. Disorder being something that interrupts our day-to-day life. And injury is actually something that needs to be healed. If you've ever talked to me about neurodivergence, I'll tell you, we can't cure neurodivergence. Why? Well, why would we want to? They're incredibly beautiful people. No reason to cure it. I want to support them as best I can. But it's a disorder. I can't cure a disorder. An injury, we can heal an injury. Everything is in the name. Says it right there. An injury I can heal. And it changes our perspective of trauma. When we are working with trauma, if it's an injury, I can clean it, I can pack it, I can apply ointment to it, and eventually it will just be a scar. Now, scars age from time to time, but it'll just be a scar. And that's what we seek to do when we're treating trauma, when we have trauma. It's removing the negative emotion from the memory. So, some of the effects we see. So, big thing is addiction. Now, addiction kind of gets an ugly rap as a word these days. The reality of addiction is typically a coping mechanism that's gone awry. When we look at things through the framework of internal family systems, there is no bad part. We have three levels. We have managers, we have firefighters, and we have outcasts. And often what we use and what we become addicted to is used as a firefighter. It's used to actually cope with whatever is in our surroundings. And it works until it doesn't, until it actually becomes more harmful than good. And then we start calling it an addiction. But the reality is that all an addiction is a coping mechanism that's gone awry. It's a coping mechanism that needed to become an outcast and is no longer a firefighter. I have a few statistics on here. I'm going to kind of go through a couple of them because it's really important. So 70% of young people seeking treatment for addiction report a history of trauma. It's like 3/4 of them are reporting history of trauma. Now, when we say that, we typically think of trauma of abuse. Trauma isn't always abuse. Bad experience at the dentist can be trauma. A car wreck, not even your fault, can be trauma. Falling out of a tree, trauma. It's any negative emotion attaching itself to a memory. So when we see this, it could literally be somebody just trying to cope with the car wreck that they had and having to ride in cars. But we end up with this cycle of trauma and addiction, and they go back and forth and round and round. And we have to break that. Next. So, the cycle of addiction and trauma. So, we have two different dynamics here that I have. One is kind of the triangle of the severity of the trauma being kind of dictating a lot of our reactions. It's not always the case. This is where we get post-traumatic stress, or we get complex post-traumatic stress disorder, excuse me, where they're not really severe traumas. It's a collection of small traumas that build up. The traumatic experience is very personal and it's very centered around the person. And so whatever they, I always use the phrase perception is reality. And so whatever they perceive as being traumatic to them is what is going to be traumatic to them. We use this this skill called cognitive reframing that allows us to take that negative emotion and give a different perception, a different viewpoint of it to draw out that negative emotion. Issue is on the right here, we have the cycle. We experienced trauma that led us to substance use, tried it as a coping skill, but that led us to more trauma, which leads us to more substance use, that coping skill, which leads us to, and we end up in this spiral. And that spiral, it doesn't stay big. It starts closing in and closing in and closing in. And this is the compounding factor until that spiral just this little hole. And that it becomes this vicious little constant in our day-to-day life. So as trauma compounds, it can start off with big, it can start off with little. But it's anything we're not resolving from our memories. It's any negative emotions with our memories that we're not resolving. But as we experience trauma and we kind of push it out, I always use the illustration of boxes. We kind of pack it in a box and then we put it away. And pack it in a box and put it away. And we keep doing that over and over. And I'm going to steal a line from a 1,000 Foot Krutch song here. It's brick by brick, we build a wall. And the thicker we make it, the less sun we see. And that's what happens. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to manage it. We don't want to remove those negative emotions because those negative emotions are really uncomfortable. They suck. There is nothing about trauma that is good. It sucks to experience. It sucks to witness. It sucks to manage. It sucks to heal from. It sucks just all around. It is a giant vacuum. It would be a Kirby if it could. This trauma sucks. So we pack it away because we don't want to deal with it. But what happens is that packing it away actually becomes a wall that starts to block out anything else that's good. One of the things that I kind of have people do a self-inventory of is how are they feeling? Not emotionally, but physically. Do you feel sick often? Do you get a lot of reflux? Are you constantly fighting a cold or a flu, or you ache and move? Are you gaining a lot of weight? That self-inventory actually is telling us a lot about the trauma we're carrying. And we can actually alleviate a lot of this by alleviating the trauma. So, the use of vitamins and nutrients. I am huge on the body and the brain go hand in hand. They are not apart. They are one unit. Go figure. Kind of brain inside body. Who knew? So we have to be aware of these things. Now, I am not a doctor. Been working on a PhD, but that's still not a medical doctor. I can't tell you what to take. I'm not going to tell you what to take. That is something that you want to go and consult a physician and actually get a lay of the land about what you're low in, what you're high in, what you need to balance out in. But for the sake of understanding, I'm going to go into some of these things that you kind of want to pay attention to. Vitamin C. We often just think about that in like fruits, right? But vitamin C has a huge mechanism in actually building dopamine and building serotonin. Vitamin D also huge mechanism building serotonin. I actually had a individual at one point who came to me seeking services, and 2.5 years, total dysthymia, total prolonged depression, could not hold a job, could not manage his family. Everything was breaking down. His wife was about to leave, nothing was going right. I asked a very simple question. Well, when's the last time anybody did a micronutrient panel on you? Well, never. Okay, cool. Go to your physician and ask for one. He comes back 2 weeks later. They gave me a shot. Okay. What did they give you a shot of? Vitamin D. Okay. His vitamin D levels were so low, they were literally zero. He asked me why, and I explained to him they were afraid that you were going to stroke walking to your car because your vitamin D was so low. See, anything below 50 nanograms per milliliter of vitamin D, we no longer burn body fat. Cortisol gets stored in body fat. Anything in the 30s, we actually are diagnosing seasonal affect disorder. Anything in the 20s, we're starting to get to really high risk of stroke, heart attack, arrhythmia, angina. These things display as psychological issues and yet are actually physiological. I always tell people if we're fighting biology and psychology, we're going to have one heck of a fight. But if you can take one of those out of the equation, we make the fight a lot easier.
This is also one of those things when we talk about what is practical help and talking about supplements and diet. We're not, and like Shane had mentioned, we're not telling people what they should and shouldn't consume or what they should spend their money on because finances and grocery shopping, but these are things that we can provide practical help to and education around nutrition that, hey, this can help your mental health. This can help your overall physical health. And working on somebody creating a budget or a meal plan. These are all practical things we can do for the population we're serving. And then we had a question in there, Shane, does it matter what type of vitamin D?
Yes, it does. But again, that would be something you probably want to consult your physician because there are things like the MTHFR gene, which has both an AT and CT mutation. There are certain types where you may not even be able to metabolize it. Knowing that would actually be really good for you, but you have to know it first. And so this is where I say consult your physician before starting anything because if you can't metabolize it, what it does is build up in your system and actually can cause more issues than help you with.
The other question was, can we get enough nutrients in food rather than supplements?
Generally speaking, yes, that's actually what I tend to steer clients towards is changing of diet, not necessarily supplements. Most supplements have like a 10% absorption rate, unless you do liquid vitamins, and liquid vitamins are horrifyingly expensive, but at least you get a 50% absorption rate, so it's not really expensive urine. But um, but that's just it is yes, you I prefer to change through diet, but it's a matter of what do you actually need, and that's where you want to start with your physician and actually go from there.
Which can be challenging when you're on, a set amount of income and budget and the quality of food. And so that's something that we can help when we are, like we said, practical wise of if we are grocery shopping or making a budget that we can take these type of things in consideration without completely trashing the other person's how they eat or what food they're consuming. We can just kind of work on maybe supplementing and trading out some of the other ones without doing a whole diet overhaul. We can just start subbing certain things out.
Correct. So this is kind of my stats report in this whole training. So everybody experiences trauma. Everybody. There is no exception to this. Everybody will have a negative emotion attaching to a memory somewhere along the way. But within our careers, within our jobs, we can experience a lot more of those depending on what we do. And that experiences within careers and experiences within life in general actually has a pretty big influence. In this is kind of the stats of what we see. So people who start experiencing trauma um, through their careers, through life, um, will start to see things like 48% reporting memory issues, or 74% reporting sleep disruption. Now, we typically go to insomnia, but actually hypersomnia, um, or what is it? Not hypersomnia, what is it called? Oh my gosh, my brain just skipped a beat. Anyways, I believe it's, yeah, basically staying up too long and not being able, or staying asleep too long, rather, and not really getting to wake up is a whole nother piece of this that actually is an avoidance and coping mechanism that our brain will kick in. We see this a lot with kids. They're just tired all the time. And it's not necessarily because of growing. It could be because they're getting bullied at school, and that tired is a way of actually avoiding reality and avoiding that dynamic that they don't want to experience. So insomnia, difficulty feeling joy. Talked about this some already, right? Um, that one's a big one because joy is pretty much the counter to trauma. And when we can't experience it because of trauma, we got to find something to alleviate the trauma. So, difference in mentality, alleviating the trauma. Words have meaning. Who knew? When we look at, so we have the empowerment dynamic, we have the drama dynamic. And a lot of times we get stuck in this drama dynamic. We get stuck as the victim or sometimes as the rescuer. We can always help somebody else, right? I will tell you, as I'm sitting here right now, I have never once healed a single person. I have facilitated people healing, but I have never once healed a person. It's because I can't. I can't fix anybody. All I can do is help them find a way to fix themselves. That is the best I can do. It's kind of like I can't take away memories, so I help facilitate them removing the emotions from the memories. Or the persecutor who's always saying it's somebody else's fault. We get stuck in this cycle, this drama triangle, this drama cycle, because we don't have to feel our own emotions in those. We get to put them onto somebody else. A lot of these negative emotions are uncomfortable. They just aren't fun to sit in and stew in and just feel. And so it's easier to take them and project them out and put them onto somebody else. And we see this pretty often. In fact, a lot of times we do this unconsciously. And then we catch ourselves like, oh, I'm sorry, that's not yours. I just didn't pull that back. So we have to change our language. We have to change the way we see it. So to move into more of the empowerment dynamic is the creator, the I can do it, the choosing to focus on the outcomes. I always say, give me solutions, not just the problem. If all we find is the problem, then we're in that drama triangle. We got to find solutions. The coach, how will you do it? Well, if I'm finding solutions, well, I have to find what my options are. Well, if I can identify the options, well, I can pick out the solutions that I want. Cool. Now I have options and solutions. These lead to challenger. You can do it. It changes our mindset, it changes our framework to become positively focused. You can see here where everything kind of lines up as opposed to one another. Bruce Lee actually made the statement, do not speak negatively about yourself, even as a joke. Your body doesn't know the difference. He said this back in the 60s. We didn't have the information that we have now. So he saw something, he observed something then that we're just now putting the science behind it. Words have meaning. If you start speaking down about yourself, poor me, I can't do this, I'm powerless. If you start, they're the problem, they're always tearing me down. If you have, I need something else for the pain, I'm too afraid to try. This language is debilitating, just flat out debilitating. You are convincing your brain that you don't have enough. And it's going to believe you because you're the one telling it. For some reason, our brain trusts itself. Who knew? So if this is the language that we stay on, we can't get beyond. We literally handicapped ourselves. So we got to change it. And it's hard because we get into these habits of how we speak about ourselves. I called myself Santa Claus when I had a big beard. It was white. Like, I have a little bit of color, but my beard is generally Santa Claus. Ho, ho, ho. Big, jolly, fat guy, right? Except for that's not a real good way to speak of myself, is it? I like the jolly. I like the giving gifts. I like the helpfulness. The big fat guy? Oh, wait. No, we're breaching a line here. That negative, I'm going to convince myself that I'm fat. Can I stand to get in better shape? Absolutely. I think we all could. But that's not what I'm going to say if I'm calling myself fat. I'm going to say I'm too big to do something. I'm going to say I can't get out of the chair. My knees are always hurting. And that's where it leads to. We have to change our dialogue with ourselves. So when somebody's coming up to us and even jokingly talking negatively about themselves, gentle correction. No, you're not. But you are joyful. You're a pleasure to see. I'm glad I get to be around you today. Wait, we've changed the dialogue. I'm nice to be around. Yay! Signs and symptoms to look for. The negative self-talk, it's pretty big sign. Or pretty big, yeah, sign. That's the word I'm looking for. Because it's something external that you can take in. See, a sign is something that I can see, I can observe. A symptom is the expression. It's what they're feeling internally. It's what they're going to communicate when I feel sad. I feel angry. I am so frustrated about this. That's a symptom. The sign is they're throwing something at the wall. Ooh, we're a little agitated today. Gotcha.
Yeah, this is where we may have to point out the sign for somebody to tell us the symptom, right? I see you pacing over and over again. I see you slamming stuff around. Those are signs I can see that you're upset. But if I don't point out the signs and I just say, hey, what's wrong? That's probably not going to be the best response. So sometimes we can point out signs to get somebody to tell us their symptoms.
So on the next slide here, we've got acute and chronic. Acute meaning something that's happening in the here and now. It's the symptoms we'll see or the signs we'll see following a trauma, following shortly thereafter. It's actually in clinical terms, it's a 3-month span of what we see. That's why PTSD isn't diagnosed beyond or until we're seeing it beyond 3 months. But acute is anything in that 3-month. Blunting or numbness is those are big ones where you just can't see any emotions coming out. That's a big sign. I can't see you having any emotion. Hey, I haven't seen you happy. I haven't seen you running around like you normally are. That'll kind of lead us to the symptoms. I've been really sad, or I've been really confused. Chronic symptoms are long term. It's everything after 3 months. It's things that are just not going away. See, an acute response to trauma can actually dissipate all on its own. Our support systems, our sleep, our can actually help us resolve those negative emotions with those memories just naturally. And so sometimes those acute symptoms they dissipate and they'll just kind of leave off. But if we're seeing them well beyond that 3-month mark, then we've got chronic. We got a problem. Because those aren't likely to dissipate all on their own. They need a little help. These are things like flashbacks. A lot of things I've witnessed with flashbacks is people just suddenly becoming angry and lashing out because it triggered a flashback and they're back in that moment. Everything about that moment that they have that flashback of, they're feeling it right then. They're seeing it, they're hearing it. That is a scary place to be because they don't feel like they have control. And those of us seeing it, we don't feel like we have control. Number one thing I do in this situation is grounding technique. All right, we're going to go and identify 5 circles in the room right now. We're bringing you back to the present. We're going to go find 3 things that are green today. Let's go for a walk and find 3 green things. It's that grounding moment that brings them back into the here and now, back into the reality. So if you have somebody who you see or you are experiencing some flashbacks, grounding is the key. We have to come back to the moment because that flashback, it's very real to us, but it's not really happening to us. That's the disconnect. It happened past, not current. So we got to bring ourselves back into current. So yeah, a lot of our chronic symptoms. This is where we diagnose PTSD or PTSI. Um, this is anything after the 3-month mark. The nightmares, the night terrors, which are actually moving from stage 3 sleep into stage 4 sleep. You're not supposed to be dreaming, but you are. Your brain's active. You're supposed to be catatonic, but you're not. Well, you kind of are. Sleep paralysis happens in that window as well. But night terrors are basically us waking up in full on fight or flight mode, no dream. We have no idea what triggered it. It's actually because our brain was active when it wasn't supposed to be. So when we have specific traumas, car wreck, dentist, that one tends to be a big one. I don't know why. I've never had a problem with a dentist, but it's a big one. Actually having kind of a debrief within 24 hours actually helps. Talking through what we felt in that moment, I was terrified. Like I had to take an inventory, make sure I wasn't bleeding. I had to, cool. talk me through this. We're just going to kind of let you dump all of it out. That's the debriefing of at within 24 hours that we really want to do.
Shane, can
Preferred
you
is within 8
elaborate?
hours.
Shane,
What's
can you
that?
elaborate on the time frame a little bit? Because I think that's important because we've all been in debriefs, and typically debriefs, what we want to do is right after an incident occurs. And I found that that isn't always because people have processing times and they process differently. And sometimes they need at least that 8 hours, but we tend to want to process immediately after something occurs. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So um, basically, so the reason we want to do this is because we really want these negative emotions to not have the ability to gravitate and attach on to that memory. We're actually within this with open time span of being able to process it out. We're actually giving those emotions ways to be resolved. And when we do this with somebody else, or we do this as a group, it's beautiful because we're actually getting different perspectives of this situation. And actually, we're doing our own cognitive reframing and actually taking that emotion apart so that we don't actually have that emotion attaching to the memory at that point. Now, this isn't 100% foolproof, and it's definitely not, um, by all means, end all to be all to trauma. Like, that's not what this is. But anything we can do to help minimize trauma's effect on us, absolutely. Um, so it's really important within that first 8 hour window to at least kind of debrief a little bit. The processing time that Cameron's mentioning is actually a 72-hour window afterwards. So we have a rule of threes when trauma occurs. We have the 3 day, 72 hours, the 3 week, and the 3 month. Usually within those rule of threes, those time frames, we're going to see something coming back up. And that's where we kind of want to, okay, well, let's resolve this one. And then let's resolve. And as we do that, we'll actually be doing our own healing and managing that trauma. Does that kind of give you a better lay of the land, Cameron?
Very much so. Thank you. Hopefully I didn't ruin your train of thought though.
Cool, you're good. So, um, yeah, so a lot of times, okay, so number one on these things. If you see somebody crying, please, for the love, just let them cry. Let them cry, let them cry, let them cry, let them cry, let them cry. Crying is a beautiful mechanism in our bodies. So cortisol, all the way back to this, right? Cortisol is a stress hormone. Our tears actually contain three primary components: water, salt, and the cortisol hormone. It is actually our body's way of trying to regain balance all on its own with a physical expression. Crying is beautiful. So if they are uncontrollably crying, cool. I'm going to sit with you while you uncontrollably cry until you don't need to cry anymore. I'll bring you water. We'll refuel the system. We'll just keep going because what the body's doing there is actually trying to keep itself from having trauma. It's actually trying to keep itself from getting that inflammation in itself. It is cool. I love crying. Downside, it also, alleviates a whole bunch of salt out of our system, and then we kind of get headaches. I'm sorry. I'm really not. I'm not changing my behavior on that one, but it's it's good. I can always put more salt, more potassium, more magnesium back into my system to help me offset the massive amount of crying. What I can't do is pull out that cortisol any better way than through that crying. So endorphins help fight it if it's already there. Couldn't tears release it? They just get it out of the system. So if you come upon somebody after a big event, um, or who's even after a flashback, this can be triggered by a flashback because, like I said, they're experiencing that exact same scenario. Even when we bring them back into the moment, That experience followed. So at least they're back in the moment and we can kind of resolve. But they're gonna probably be crying. Let them cry. Please let them cry. I cannot emphasize that one enough because their body is trying to bring itself back into balance. And again, allowing those involved to talk about their experience. You're giving different viewpoints of the same event. This helps us reframe the event. Because all I have when that event happens is my perspective. And my perspective probably didn't see everything. And it's probably flawed in some way. So, and then the biggest one at the bottom here is allowing the individual to have a break from engaging. So while we want to debrief, frequent breaks from this as well, not a bad thing either. Giving that body the ability to kind of reset and recoup. That's what we want to do. We want to allow it to just kind of come back and re-engage when it's ready to. So this kind of goes back into the rule of threes. It's the we should have some sort of support, usually about twice weekly, but definitely within the 72-hour window of a traumatic event. And support, we'll go into supports in a little bit. I'll go down a rabbit trail if I try that. Um, but we want to just kind of be aware of the signs. Symptoms are only what they're going to express. Only what an individual expresses can we understand as a symptom. The signs, on the other hand, are what we can observe. Are they isolating? Are they not eating? Are they getting really agitated very quickly, short fuse, not sleeping? No. These are the signs we can look at and we want to be aware of and we want to be observing. And so anybody who's providing that support, that kind of peer or regular support system, we just kind of want to be doing regular assessments, specifically like a risk assessment as well, right? Like really want to be touching in on, hey, notice you haven't been eating, how you feeling? Have you had any suicidal thoughts? Have you had any thoughts to harm somebody else? Like we really want to make sure that we're asking the question. You're not going to put it into their head. If they've already had the thought of suicide, the thought of homicide, you're not putting anything in their head. What you're doing is you're asking the question of whether or not they've had it so we can negotiate it. And I always tell people, everybody will have that thought that I don't want to be here anymore. This is too hard. The world would be better without me. Everybody's had that thought at some point in their life. Cool. We can resolve that. Those thoughts we can resolve through connection, through attachment, through affection. We have the ability to resolve those thoughts. When we start having plan and intent, we need to have a different discussion. That's when we need to start assessing for a safety plan, assessing for constant observation, assessing for what level of service we need to be providing. We need to up the ante a little bit when we start seeing plan or intent. So the most effective I have found, now there are a lot of treatment options out there. The most effective I've found is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy. I've mentioned multiple times, cognitive reframing. It has the longest lasting effect. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, it is great. In my experience, it is great for a short term. But about 6 months later, you're going to be going back for more EMDR. With cognitive reframing, you don't. We resolve the emotions attached to those memories. Takes a lot longer, but it lasts a lot longer. So back to diet. So I'm very big on what we put in is what we're going to get out. I'm big on it. I tend to follow a Mediterranean diet because a Mediterranean diet has nothing to do with weight loss. Mediterranean diet was actually established for mental health. The Mediterranean diet actually helps us balance our mental health. It balances anxiety, it balances depression, it balances. But because we have a format of a Mediterranean diet, it is something we can go back to. We were asking the question of diet rather than supplements, right? Mediterranean diet, great to go back to, especially if you have low income or if you are required or on food stamps or any other supports. Usually I can go back and find something that those apply to on this diet and actually apply it to my system. And that's what I love about having the Mediterranean diet available is it means that I have a resource to go back to that I can always see, okay, what can I do to make myself healthier? Right back to the beginning of all of this, am I better today than I was yesterday? Psychology, physiology. Am I better today than I was yesterday? Another thing we can use for treatment is what they call trauma-reducing exercises. These are actually kind of cool. Cortisol, stress hormone, loves to be taken into our fat cells. It just, that's where it lives. It's like, yay, me, I have a happy home. What these exercises do is they actually release inflammation within our body and actually release the cortisol out of our fat stores, out of our muscles, out of everything. And so these stretches actually help get our system back on course. One of the coolest ones, so there's this nerve that actually runs from your head all the way down to your stomach, called the vagus nerve. Now, the vagus nerve is actually why our stomach is considered the second brain because, oh, a gut feeling, vagus nerve. But along the vagus nerve also tells us whether we're full, whether we're anxious, with all sorts of things this thing controls. In some instances, it's really good to activate. In other instances, it's really good to deactivate. Fun trick. If you're getting a lot of anxiety, you can actually deactivate it. Lay flat on your back, head behind your head, take your eyes and stick them to 3 o'clock. Hold that position until you either have the urge to swallow, sigh, or, oh my gosh, what is the third one? Swallow, sigh, or yawn. There we go. One of those three things will occur. At that point, your vagus nerve is actually deactivated and actually alleviates a lot of the anxiety you're feeling. It is great. It can rev back up. Do it again, it'll resolve in 2 or 3 times. You can pretty well head on your merry. It is awesome when we want to go to sleep. FYI, do it before you want to go to sleep. It helps. But what these do is they actually help all of our body get back into alignment and get everything out of the system that shouldn't be there to begin with. On the next slide, we have a barrage of different poses and things. You can use chairs if you aren't highly mobile. You can use the ground. There's a whole bunch of these, and actually, I have a video link at the very end of this presentation to help if you're interested. That actually has a whole TRE. Yep, Cameron's got it in the messages there. Um, that actually helps us alleviate a lot of our stress and a lot of our stress hormone. Fun fact, um, yes, hence why I said chair. Yeah, yeah, you are absolutely correct. So, okay, because Leah actually made the comment in the messages about trauma releasing exercises are amazing, but it's important to think about safety doing these movements of what the reactions can be after or when releasing those emotions and trauma, especially from the hips. Also, humming is an amazing way to stimulate the vagus nerve. We do a group hum at the end of our recovery circles. I love it. Again, good times to activate it and good times to deactivate the vagus nerve. Both sides. Um, so yoga. Yoga is one of those things that is widely used for this. P90X makes a yoga. Be aware. Do not do the P90X without a lot of previous experience, or you will end up like me. And at the end of 5 minutes, I was pretty much certain that I needed an ambulance to get me off the floor. Because, no, not speaking negatively about myself in this instance, this is a factual thing. I have been a deputy and an EMT. I have done a lot of mountain rescue and search and rescue. My body has taken a lot of abuse. Shoulder, hip, knee, they don't function all that well. Getting into some of these positions, if I'm in the position, you should just call 911 now because I'm gonna need an ambulance. So it's really important. She is absolutely correct. It's really important to be aware not only of your positions, but then the release afterwards. Again, if you feel the need to cry, please cry. Cry, cry, cry. It is doing a self inventory. It is taking assessment of yourself after these exercises and determining, okay, what am I feeling internally? I love emotions wheels for this reason, because a lot of times what happens is we can't remember what an emotion feels like because we buried it for so long. This is actually what we see with anger and fear a lot of times. They'll come out big force because they're covering up other emotions that are so uncomfortable. Anger's Anger's a big one. We all experience anger. It can be the loudest voice in the room, and then I don't have to feel that uncomfortable feeling that I've got. And we forget how to actually feel it. So at the end of these exercises, it is a beautiful thing to just kind of go through an emotions wheel and go, okay, what am I feeling? Because a lot of times we've forgotten what it feels like. We forget kind of those smaller emotions of, you know, I kind of feel a little disgusted, or, you know, kind of feel a little bit of shame here. And we want to know that. We want to become comfortable again with those emotions, because when you become comfortable with those emotions again, it's a lot easier to resolve those emotions. Using the analogy of a marathon, can I just go out and run a hyper marathon? I mean, anybody know what a hyper marathon is? It's like 100 miles minimum. Minimum. You are running 100 miles. Okay. One, running should only be done when giving chase or when being chased. So number two, if you see me running, you should look ahead of me, because if I'm not giving chase, then you should probably run too, because I can't fight whatever I'm running from. But I don't go to a hyper marathon without training. I gotta get my body learning what it feels like to run distance. Because if I don't have that, I'm never making it through that hyper marathon. And believe me, emotions through life, they're a hyper marathon. So if we forget how to step in some of those places, we got to go back and retrain them so that we don't slip and fall later down the line.
he is also agreeing that there's a lot of crying after hip release and that it's both amazing and awful at the same time.
Yeah, my wife taught me to do yoga, and that's where I learned there was a P90X yoga, and that's where I learned that I hate P90X. All right, so support system. Support systems cannot be overstated. And there's a lot of differences in the way a support system looks. I tell people all the time, I get you for an hour, and in that hour, we're going to be tearing down a lot. The support system is there to build you back up. Going through and healing trauma sucks. It does. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And you don't even have to go fully into all the details of the trauma. In fact, I prefer often if we don't, because then I feel like I'm taking on a little bit more and I have to make that boundary. Got to be aware of me, right? Where's my boundary? What am I taking on? So, as a support system, you got to be hyper aware of what you take on. Because if you take on too much, now you're trying to take on their trauma, and we're getting secondary trauma, and we're going to have a problem. But when I'm going through trauma with people, we're cleaning out a wound for an hour. And even through deactivation towards the end of session, there's still going to be some residual from that cleaning. And we need a support system on the backside to build us back up. That is what a support system is. A support system is anybody who shows up and builds up. Now, I've listed out, the standard support systems, family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, spiritual leaders, but actually there's even more. There's things like the Trauma Survivors Network. There's Trauma Collaborative Care, Center for Trauma Survivorship, the Trauma Recovery Services. These are other collectives. And in this digital age, these are collectives that we could actually get onto a support group through Facebook or through, whatever their website is, and actually engage with this support group, building us back up with these traumas. This is actually what we see a lot of times with like Al-Anon. Al-Anon is individuals who are on the backside of or on the family side of somebody else's addiction and their experiences and the traumas that they have experienced from those. And what it is a collection of people who have shared experiences, who are expressing those traumas and building each other up in those. Because a person is a person, not an addiction. And so even those of us who have individuals who have experienced addictive natures, we want people to make sure they're seen as people, because they are. They're not the addiction. They are a person who had a coping mechanism that went awry. And it caused hurt with them, and it caused hurt with others. And this is a way we resolve that. So building a support system. Here is a roadmap. In fact, I can't really make a better roadmap. That's why I posted this one, because it's a beautiful roadmap. Support systems are about building us up, and I'm better today than I was yesterday. I'm going to keep repeating that phrase because that is the reality. When we're dealing with trauma, if I'm worse today, then I need to see to that. If I'm better today, cool. What made me better, and how can I keep doing that? Am I better today than I was yesterday? Our support systems are there to help us get to that empowerment, get to that betterness, and promote our positive speech. In 1995, they did a study. It approximately took 5 people to build up one negative person, which in counter means that one negative person could bring down 4 positive people. In 2008, they redid this study. It now takes 8 positive people to build up one negative person. Now, either we got a lot more negative about ourselves, or positive people aren't as positive as they used to be, or we're allowing less positive people into our lives. One of these two factors happened, but it happened. And so now, one negative person can break down 7 positive people. It takes 8 to build them back up. When we're treating trauma, it actually reverts back. So if you're in trauma treatment, it'll actually revert back to that 1995 statistic. Kind of cool, right? This is actually the importance of seeking help. Seeking somebody who can help you navigate the trauma. And then the support system doesn't have to work as hard.
This is
Don't get me wrong.
especially important, Shane, and I know you working with first responders, anybody in corrections, anybody in crisis work, anybody who's working with people potentially on the worst day of their life. You see a lot of negative, and we don't get to see a lot of positive. So these are the type of things that are very important for us, especially as caregivers, to understand that people do get better. We are just seeing the negative side of that reinforcing, and it starts to get a little jaded where we don't think people do get better. They don't recover. That injury or healing from that injury isn't positive. So even though we're having this be more client focused, this is important for us to realize too that we need this for ourselves, especially in this field, especially when we are in the mud sitting with the person while they're going through it.
Oh yeah, I'll even give you personal experience here, because Cameron's dead on. When I was a corrections deputy, I was a corrections deputy. I wasn't a Christian. I wasn't a father. I wasn't a husband. I was a corrections deputy. That's it. Because if I was anything outside of that, that trauma that I experienced in that jail, those fights for life that I had to go through, they were coming home, and I couldn't have that. The interesting part is the counter to that is how much damage I did because I wouldn't bring that home. It's a misconception that we leave work at work. That is not the case. It is an impossibility. Work will go with us regardless of where we're at. Does my wife want all the details of a fight for life? No. Does she want to know that I was in an altercation? Absolutely. Does she deserve to? Absolutely. That was a communication failure on my part with my support system. She had no idea how to build me back up because I never communicated what I needed to be built back up with. Now, as you can see, I'm sitting before you. I never lost a fight for life, but I sure could have used some support after them. And in that field, it's a slap on the back and good job, you made it through it. We move on with our day. That's why support systems are so important. And as an individual who has been on that side, communication is so important with our support system. Failure to communicate basically removes their ability to support us. So, hey, wow, we timed this pretty good, Cameron. So, in conclusion here, and I kind of touched on it, but there's a high prevalence of suicide associated with trauma, and it really can't be understated. Um, Either the attempt or the completion of suicide by individuals um, really has a strong trauma component in that. Because all of us experience trauma, and we all experience trauma differently. In fact, I use this a lot. If I break my arm and you break your arm in the exact same spot, are we going to heal exactly the same? No. We have a different inflammatory response. We have a different micronutrient response. We have a different endorphin release. We have a different pain tolerance. We have everything is so different. We're going to heal differently. Trauma is experienced differently by every individual. So it is so important that we're communicating trauma. Critical incidents happen. Life happens. Can't stop it. But we can do something about how we respond to it. Treating acute trauma helps to mitigate chronic trauma. Treating chronic trauma helps to mitigate, top of that, suicide. And then self-care support systems are paramount to all of this, building each other up, finding a support system that builds you up, absolutely paramount to recovering from trauma. And I always say, this is our community. We are the ones that have the power to make a change and take care of it.
Besides the exercise, Lee is talking about doing safety plans with staff quarterly, and that asking each staff member to identify 2 safe supports at work and 2 safe supports in their personal life. Of those safe supports, they have the ability to say something when they see something off, and that promote the rest of us having dark rooms in the office with chairs and couches to rest. So I applaud your efforts. Looks like you're running a tight shop over there, Leah.
I love it. Beautiful. If you ever notice, well, okay, you're never going to notice because you haven't ever seen my office. But if you do notice, I don't have an overhead light on behind me. It is all natural lighting in my office right now. That is because I can't stand fluorescents. They give me migraines and make me nauseous. Environment, I love the fact that you are pushing towards environment control, Leah. That is amazing. Dark rooms and offices with chairs and couches to rest. And I love that. Good job. Because sensory input, right? Reduction in sensory input helps us to balance. And that's what we're looking for.
So we try to aim pretty close to 15 to 10 minutes for Q&A. So that brings us now to this section of feel free. And like I said, if it is something that you don't want to be seen in the general chat, if you want to send it to me directly, I will do my best to omit whatever it is that needs to be omitted. But we'll open it up for last 10 minutes of any Q&A for you. Guardian
have a
screens over lights. I
question.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I am a behavioral health navigator for law enforcement for 2 agencies in Grace Harbor County. And I do a, mental health co-responder out on scene with officers. So I see PTSD, both sides, that community member experiencing the trauma, and of course, law enforcement, taking on that secondary trauma, often without a break, going from scene to scene. But, when it comes to safety plans, like we have a high rate of suicide ideation with youth in our community, especially post-COVID. A lot of kids have mental health stuff that they're just really struggling with. And one of the things I like to implement is that use of a safety plan, especially as they're waiting to get enrolled with any type of long-term care. With providers, WISE teams often have wait lists. And so there's that gap in the crisis and then actually getting engaged with services. And when it comes to that safety plan, is there a way, a tip, a trick, a tool on really encouraging that? Because what I've found is they just fall back on the self-harm or immediately up in the emergency department or going to the old ways of dealing.
Yeah, and that's where that support system for me is identifying some people that they feel comfortable to hold them accountable. So when they do have that, the individual that they feel comfortable with has a copy of the safety plan or the crisis plan. Sometimes we do them very, very long, right? So depending on whether it's a huge one that covers all areas from hospitalization to coping it, or it's very specific, we try to identify somebody in there. And it doesn't have to be somebody who's very close to them, because sometimes the people who are close to us the most is the people that we don't want to traumatize or hurt as well. And so, can we find a happy medium in there that there's somebody who trusts that isn't so emotionally attached to them or not, that feels comfortable potentially hurting their feelings or calling them out on the carpet when they're seeing stuff? So, we recommend that you identify at least 2 to 3 people that you can give that to where it's not going to be coming from the clinical provider, it's going to be coming from the support system to identify those and call them out on the carpet.
Biggest key factor in any support system is showing up. Can't do anything unless they show up. So, and this is what I've actually gone and trained our crisis teen group here in Tri-Cities. And it's one of the things that I push so hard at them. Like, if you've made contact, you have an outreach team, show back up, show support, because what you're doing is right out of the gate, you're showing somebody actually cares. Time is the most valuable commodity that we have ever. I can always earn more money. I can always get another house. I can always work towards something else. Time, I can't make any more of that. So if I'm going to spend my time on somebody else, I'm showing them value.
A shout out for Elijah Family Homes, so that if you have any pregnant or parenting women in active addiction or early recovery, they're accepting new clients.
Beautiful. If Barb is still working there, tell her hi for me.
Sorry, who was that?
Barb Pugh.
Oh, no, but we love Barb.
She is amazing. I love her.
Yeah.
That last resource was Elijah Family Homes. And so they're in the chat too, and the email if you need to send out a referral over there. Any other questions, comments, even concerns? Maybe not a question, but just something piggybacking off of something that was discussed earlier. I'm giving it the 3-second window. All right. Well, without any other further questions, comments, or concerns, thank you very much for your time. We like doing this. We find it very valuable as well. So keep up the good work in your communities. And I hope that you are supported and find these valuable and reach out for the next one.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Cameron. Very, very informative and a lot of information.
You're welcome. And hopefully you get a copy of that and then you can kind of sit there and check it out and
It
bite
would
size
be
some
good.
infos. Yes.
Will you be sending out the PowerPoint as well?
Yes, we will
That will
send
help
that
a
to
lot.
Brianna, and then she'll make sure everybody on here gets a copy of it. I'll do that right away.
Yes. Thank you, Shane.
so
Thank you,
much.
Cameron. So much. Very, very good information. All
You're
right,
welcome.
everybody, have a wonderful day. We'll get those resources out to you within the week. You can also check them on YouTube recording section of our webpage to watch the recording. All right. Have a good day, guys.
Bye.
Have a good day.